G'day, mate. What's your name?
My name's former legend, not that it's any of your business.
And what do you do, former?
I'm a wellness blogger, an influencer, an Instagram model, and also part-time podcaster.
I'm basically a man for the 21st century.
Well, you'd imagine so, yeah, but I'm stuck in the 19th century probably, or at least the 20th century.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Crowdworkcast. My name's Andrew Barnett. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, my guest this week is former legend. Now, former is probably best known as the host of Full Credit to the Boys, which was a rugby league comedy podcast that ran for 9 years and finished up last year. Although, if you listen carefully, he does indicate a little bit that maybe it's not completely dead. Maybe it will come back in some other form. So that's exciting news. Now, if you are a sports fan and you miss the dulcet sounds of former legend, if you used to listen to Full Credit to the Boys, you can hear him every week on his new podcast. It's called Full Credit to the Noise. Now, that is a motor racing podcast. He does that for Speed Cafe. It's also really, really good. So if you are at all into motor racing, check that out. Now, one of the things I love about the way former does podcasts. It was the thing that made me really enjoy Full Credit to the Boys, which he did with Sid Punts, was it's a dose. There's a lot of sports comedy podcasts out there, but what these guys do is there's a good dose of sports. You get your good sports information, but there's also proper written jokes, which I always really sort of in my mind made me stand out from a lot of other stuff. The way these guys approach their podcasts. So Former is a very, very funny guy. This was a really, really fun chat. I absolutely love chatting to former legends. So you're going to enjoy it. Have a listen. He's got some great tips for podcasting, talking about formatting and preparation, all the stuff basically I don't do enough of for this podcast. But hey, what are you going to do? I am who I am. So give Former a follow on Instagram. He is at former_legend. Give his podcast a listen. Full Credit to the Noise. You can go back through the back catalogue of Full Credit to the Boys. It stands up. You can hear what I'm talking about in terms of just the joke writing involved in the way they do a podcast. So yeah, this was a really fun chat. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do like, subscribe, do all that sort of good stuff. And if there's anyone you want me to talk to, reach out at Andrew Barnett Comedy on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok even. So reach out. Let me know who you'd like me to talk to. Let me know you're enjoying the podcast. And if you could see your way to leaving a nice review, that would really help too. Other than that, thanks so much for listening. Enjoy this. This is my chat with former legend. Yeah, it's good getting 20th century opinions on a 21st century technology. That's fantastic, mate.
Oh, well, if anyone's seen us just battling for the last half hour and watching us battle technology, two middle-aged men really struggling with new technology, it's not a good thing.
Mate, I was doing some serious Googling. I've only had, on this little software I use, I've only had one other guest have trouble with it, and he's Trevor Crook, and he's in his 70s.
And he's a porn addict as well, isn't he? So
he's massive porn addict.
Yeah, well,
despite being a man who claims to struggle with technology, you were probably one of the earlier podcasters around. Now, before we get into that, though, I do need you to give a plug to your current podcast because you've got a motorsport podcast.
Yeah, so like we did do a show called Full Credit to the Boys. You might have heard it, you might not have. And now I do a podcast weekly with Speed Cafe, which is a motorsport podcast. They wanted to do something that was a little bit had news, but also had a few jokes. So that's why they've brought me in. I haven't landed many, to be fair. It's not Babe Ruth territory at the moment, but it's very interesting. So Full Credit to the Noise is my current one. I do it with a guy called Andrew Van Leeuwen, who's a serious motorsport journalist who's won awards and everything else. I'm slowly destroying his career. He will be dead set. He'll be at Centrelink before you know it. But yeah, it's it's interesting, but we'll talk about that because it's quite interesting to see the differences in production and everything else, and what you can and can't say when you do own a podcast and when you're doing a podcast for another group. And you guys
Y
would know that too.
Yeah, there is that because it's interesting with the way podcasting started. It was basically, and you go back and you listen to early podcasts. I don't
Mm.
know when you first became aware of them, but I remember I think I first started listening to podcasts around 2008, and I
Used to
think
find
there
them in the bush. Used to find
yeah,
them in the
yeah.
bush. You'd find
That was it. There was and they like, I remember, like, listening to the back catalog of one of the podcasts I listened to, and then it was like, "Oh, I've got nothing to listen to till the next episode comes
mm.
out,"
Yeah,
and
true.
you just had nothing to listen to. Now
Mm.
it's like every man and his dog's got a podcast.
Not only that, I think it's changed a lot even from when we were doing it. So our show went for 10 years,
Mm.
9 years it did. So I did 1 year with a guy named Late Mailman, who was from Channel 10. He hit me up and said, "Would you be interested in doing a podcast on rugby league?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And then he actually got a job in the media somewhere else. Probably better not throw where that is.
Yeah.
So he was actually under a pseudonym as well. And so I got in Sid Punts. If anyone follows him on Twitter, have a look at him. He's a funny bloke, but he's also a very talented guy. And we thought, the reason I picked up Sid, and I know Sid knows this now, so it's not a secret, but just because he had recording gear. So it was like that made him
Yeah,
that made him a
save money.
podcaster. Yeah, exactly right. So we had all the gear, and I remember the first time we did it, we were 3 parts pissed because we'd been drinking all afternoon because we're both so nervous, which is so crazy given we're like we're probably getting maybe 1,000 downloads in them days, and that would have been you're doing cartwheels down your hallway at 1,000 downloads, and then so we basically learnt on the run, but Sids have got a very similar sort of sense of humor to me. It took a while for us to sort of gel and click. You know what it'd be like with Professor, and then but after a while it was just like I don't know, it's like coming home to your best mate and just riffing. And we forgot that a lot of the times we forgot the the microphones were on, which was horrendous on some occasions.
Yeah, there
Horrendous.
was it was you guys did have that, and it's I'd like to say it's rare, but it's amazing when you find it with someone that just you can click with and your sensibilities align comedically, and that makes
Mm.
life much, much easier when you're doing a podcast or anything like that where you're trying to put comedy out into the world. One of the things I notice about that though is that podcast in particular, you were one of the first that I was aware of to actually have segments and to
That was deliberate.
mm,
For heaps of reasons, like, and more reasons came. We sort of learned even more about why it works. But basically, what we wanted to do is we wanted to write a show that was similar to a rugby league show on radio,
mm,
and segmentizing it was the best way. And the other reason, or one of the other reasons it's great, is that you can pull sponsors. So you can say this next segment's brought to you by. Where if it's one long chat, you're just sinking ads in the middle of nowhere. And we all know that shuffle twice and skip twice, and you're through the ads.
yeah,
Whereas we used to sort of put the segments were brought to you by, and then we've built relationships with great people like Bluebet and things like that, where we just sort of kept going with it. But the segmentizing was definitely we were trying to reflect radio, Barney.
mm,
And I think if I was, and even now when I'm doing the podcast I'm doing, same thing is to break it
mm,
up into segments and kind of give, like, not that I'm going to give podcasting 101 lessons here because I'm no expert, but trying to give people consistency. There are things that we always struck upon was we wanted to make it consistent. We wanted to know that the first 3 stories we read were going to be about dicks or Siamese twins or blokes getting caught with something down the shaft or
or
something like
something
that.
going on in Florida.
Yeah, Florida was just a melting pot. Yeah, what a place. And then so that was that. Then we would do the footy, and that's what we tried to do is just keep building that sequence so people got used to it. The other thing that we were big on, and Sid was brilliant at, and still is production value.
Mm,
So the audio had to be top notch. We got Rode come along and gave us a bit of a hand with audio and stuff like that. And then he is nothing short of a genius around putting noises in, making songs, that sort of thing. It just gave us a sort of an edge compared to just two blokes sitting back and talking footy, which we still get told you sound like that anyway, just two blokes at a bar having a chat, which is great. You want that sort of familiarity and that warmth and that sort of genuine, just two blokes, um, just chatting away. But yeah, so we kind of deliberately did a lot of things. To be honest with you, we listened to a lot of things like um, Tony Martin's been on podcasts, and so he chats about
Yep.
the industry. And bloke's a genius, I remember Tom Gleisner saying that his whole thing with Working Dog is that they try and do a joke every 21 seconds, and mate, that gets tough. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
We tried that. When you start hearing all these ideas around these guys and how they work and how long they've been in the industry, you actually start seeing, oh yeah, they actually do that. They stick to that's not just something they've said in an interview. They're actually doing that, and that's why they're successful. So we try to do those sorts of things. When you write that many jokes, as you guys know, a lot of them are going to miss. A lot of them,
Yep.
the ones that it's really weird, some of the ones that you think is absolute comedy gold, there is not a mention of them. And then you do something that's as lame as shit that's been done for 20 years, and people will be wetting their pants and message you about it and say it's the greatest thing they've ever heard. It's a strange sort of industry to be in. But yeah, it's fun. I miss full credit to the boys in some ways. I don't miss the workload because we were doing a 2-hour podcast and people don't would probably not believe us. I'm sure you understand it, but we would be writing for all weekend and there would be
Mm.
anxiety if you hadn't touched the podcast until Sunday afternoon. Mate, you'd have this level of just guilt where you're like, oh shit, and we always said we don't want to phone it in. So we always try to just keep it funny. And look, there was times where it did miss, but there was times where I just think it was brilliant.
But mate, that was the thing, and you mentioned that like it helped you guys stand out was that you guys one of the things I noticed very early on,
Mm,
and because I think I've got my radar up for it working in comedy, is that I like listening first time listening, I was like, oh, these guys are writing jokes. These aren't
yes.
just let's throw up a funny story and see if one of us can think of something on the fly. You had
Yeah.
written jokes, you had a way you'd interact with each other, like where you'd give each other space to deliver their punchline. You weren't rushing to jump over each other to jump on the punchline or whatever.
So
It
true.
it struck me a bit like I remember hearing because it's funny you mentioned Tony Martin back when Martin Malloy
Oh,
were
just
working
brilliant.
together. Yeah,
Brilliant. Yeah.
I heard a story that they apparently used to write completely separately, pretty much,
I've heard that too.
and
Yeah.
then come together so they would surprise each other with
And but
their
they
jokes.
Tony, I remember listening to an interview with Tony and Mick for that matter, and both of them saying, the amount of work that went into that show absolutely exhausted them. Like they couldn't have gone another year if they wanted to. They were just stuffed. I mean, they've both pretty much landed on their feet, mix flying, but
Yeah.
you could tell Tony was probably driving the production value as much as anything. Not that he's not a funny guy; he's a very funny guy. But you could tell that sort of radio is um, it's very rare. I don't know anyone's doing that anymore. I might be wrong. Um,
No, yeah, nothing I'm aware of, especially,
the setups, the skits, the no one's doing that. Tony does a podcast by himself, which is genius. You should, have a listen to that if you want to hear a bloke just the master of his
Sizzletown.
craft. It's just brilliant. It's just
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. The bloke's a freak. But I can imagine that it would also be the death of him as well doing that show because
Oh,
the production values in that are just unbelievable.
and I think that's one of the compliments, I suppose, that you're getting that you probably sometimes doesn't feel like a compliment, but it's always good when you're doing comedy when people think they don't see the preparation that's gone
It's a good
into it
call. Yeah,
because
it's
it
interesting.
it needs to seem a bit spontaneous. Like
Mm.
I know doing stand up a couple of times I've had like I remember doing I was working at the Comedy Store and I was hosting and I just got chatting to this guy in the audience and he was a real estate agent and I went, "Oh, I know. I used to do a bit about real estate agents." So I just sort of did it like it made me think of that. So I did it. And then afterwards this guy comes up to me after the show who was he'd actually just got a job on Triple J and he was in town checking it out. And so he'd been
Nice.
around comedy and stuff. And he goes, "Mate, how did you think of all that off the cuff? I'm like, oh, seriously,
Yeah.
mate, I
But
didn't.
when you've been doing it like you've been doing it, like I've gone through your show here on YouTube, just had a look at who you've spoken to, and there's just, mate, there are so many people plying their trade that are just absolute workhorses. Dave O'Neill, Lawrence Moody, Burner, all those guys that you've chatted to, and then the ones that probably not a lot of people are aware of, like Heggie and people like that, where you just go,
Mm.
you do that. That is your job. It's not some plaything or anything like that. And so, yeah, when you're up on stage and something comes at you, there's probably not a lot that's going to come at you where you're going to go, "Well, I'm fucked. I don't know what to say here." Oh, can we swear on this, by the way?
Yeah, you can swear
Yeah,
away,
yeah.
mate.
So yeah, like, do I guess that's the difference between young comics and older comics that have done it for a long time. Young comics can still be funny. There's no doubt about that. But that experience to be able to adapt on the run would probably come better with treading the boards for so long.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like anything. Like it's a learned skill that
Mm,
there's a bunch of tricks to it. There's learned skill, but there's stuff you learn too that you can only learn by doing it. Or there's a guy out of New Zealand. He goes by the name of El Jaguar. He performs,
right?
and he goes on in luchador, full luchador outfit, and he'll pull someone out of the audience. And I'm going to teach you how to wrestle your inner demons. And it has all that. Like, he's very funny, but it's weird and it's out there. But
Yep.
he always had this habit. I worked with him over a stint, and he always had this habit of picking the exact right person out of the
Right.
audience.
Not plants. They weren't plants.
No, they weren't plants. But that's what I said to him. I said, "How did you?" He goes, "Oh, I spent 10 years as a street performer, and you learn to read the people." He goes, "You don't want the guy who's too keen because he's going to try too hard to be funny.
Or
You don't,
outshine you. Yeah.
yeah." You don't want the guy who's gonna close off too much because
Mm.
he's not gonna wanna go with it. You need the guy, he goes, he sort of half leans forward, but then it's like just slightly, and he was telling me all these little body language
Gives,
things he looks
tells.
at,
Yeah.
and I was
That's
like, "That
interesting.
is." Yeah, it's genius, but that's a
Yeah.
guy who's, just learnt that skill by trial and error. He said, "Oh, it's bad when it goes the wrong way, if you if you misread it."
It's funny. I listened to a podcast by an American guy, Ryan Sickler. I don't know whether you ever listened
Oh,
to
yeah.
him. Like he's, I love him. Like, if you don't
Yeah.
love just a bloke who's got a great laugh, if nothing else, his laugh will have you in stitches. It's the best. But he used to do a show called The Crab Feast with Jay Larson, and it was a
Yes.
fantastic show. And it was all about just comedians talking about parts of their life, but then also talking about the industry. One thing I've always wondered whether it applies in Australia, and someone who hasn't done any comedy, but do crowd work guys get looked down on like they do in America? Because it seems like they're sort of put in the shade a bit by guys that have an actual stand up.
No, so that has changed a little bit in the last, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, especially with, like, social media, because everyone
Mm.
realized that if you get a good crowd work clip, you
Well, what's that
can,
guy over in England, or is it he does it all the time? The redheaded guy, he's got teeth
like
like
an
a piano.
Englishman.
Yeah, no, he's got teeth like a piano. They're bright white. They're the veneers. He does crowd work all the time. I'll find him for you. But yeah,
Mm.
that's all his clips are. So I guess, yeah, maybe with the
So
times they're changing.
so with that, sort of the idea with that was because comedians, like, it takes you a long time to hone your jokes or whatever, but you don't,
Mm,
and then there was a real reluctance from a lot of comedians to burn their material by putting it online.
mm.
Um, but
Ah,
so
yeah, I get it. Yeah, yeah. So crowd work
so
is it.
the crowd works easy, and then but that's generated because there's been people who've their entrance into comedy has been seeing clips and going, "Oh," and thinking that it's a lot of crowd work. So you get a lot of newer comics now who are looking to do crowd work straight off because they want clips. They want, they want to build their profile.
Yep.
So that has changed a bit. Like, there's a guy when it's done really well. There's a guy. He's based in LA who I worked with a bunch here. Why am I blanking on his name? He's an absolute champion. But he has always sort of done crowd work, and, like, before it was sort of anyone was
Before it
filming
was
anything,
cool. Yeah, yeah,
well, just before clips, like, people were
yeah,
putting
yeah.
clips up on any social media, and he's blown up in the last sort of, maybe the last 12 months on YouTube.
Right.
Um, Ian Bagg is his name.
Okay, I'll have a
Mate,
look.
he's if you have a look, like he's some of his clips, but he's a guy where when that happened, he's the guy you wanted it to go well because he just always did it and always did it really well. But he was like he had written jokes, like he
Mm.
had proper jokes, but where he'd go would depend on who he was talking to. So he was able to go into the crowd, talk to someone. There's a great clip of him online talking to a kid. I think it was at a Just for Laughs gala. And there's like a
Mhm.
14-year-old kid and they're sitting there with his parents and he says, this is like the kind of stuff he had the balls to do. He just says to the kid, has your dad given you the talk yet
Yeah,
about
nice.
sex? And he said,
I would have went the first pubes thing, but sure, go with that.
no. Well, and then he just says to the kid, he goes, first time you go down on a woman, it has a kick. No one tells you about it. It's like, and it's just his
Of
he's the
course.
exact guy
Yeah,
you want to
yeah.
see do crowd work. When it's done poorly, it's tedium, but when it's
Yeah.
done the way he does it, it's absolutely amazing. So
Yeah, there's a couple of guys that sort of like you say that I'm not a TikTok guy, but I like reels. You see, they just all their crowd work's genius, but I guess they must sift through the fucking clay, the shit to get to the clay sort of thing. You know, there must be a lot of dead time where they're like, no, I got nothing there for that guy. Um, yeah, so it's interesting. I've always like I wouldn't say I'm a student of comedy. That would be absolutely. Um, yeah, that would be selling myself very, very long, not short. But I went and watched Billy Connolly 2 nights in a row when he was in
oh wow.
Sydney in the 90s. You know, like
Mm.
just and you know what he delivered two different shows.
Yeah.
And he it just brilliant. He would take you on these rides, and and the genius of him, and this is no secret, but he would start the show with a story, and then somehow 2 hours later, he end the show with that same story, and the hilarity of being able to remember where he was up to and finish the story was genius in itself. It was, yeah. So I've always been into comedy, but you talk about crowd work. Have you ever gone? This might be sort of dating my age. I used to watch. I've gone and seen Rodney Roode a few times, and I've
Oh,
never seen anyone finish on top of him. Like he was brutal.
mate, Rodney Roode he would be a dream guest for this, but he's fairly
He's a recluse,
reclusive.
basically, isn't he? Yeah,
Yeah, now,
yeah,
and but he would do like an hour, have intervals, like have an interval,
yep.
sell merch, and then
Birch,
do
yeah,
another 90 minutes. Like he's
yeah.
just an absolute beast of a comedian. Now I like there are people now who probably go, oh, you can't do whatever,
Of course,
this
but that,
but there's also you got to give him the due. Like he got arrested in Queensland
yep.
for under obscenity laws, and he's the reason we don't have those laws anymore. Like he
Yeah,
actually
brilliant.
went and fought it.
He's
So
also, I think he's one of the first comedians to make his shows non-smoking, and a lot of promoters went, "We can't deal with you. You're killing
mm,
yourself. You're actually robbing yourself of money." And now, like you
mm,
look at that and you think, "Holy shit, he was actually ahead of his time in that regard." Um, but yeah,
mate,
it's funny how much comedy you look at what we were laughing at, and like I'm not saying today's worse. I'm not saying today's better, but it's funny what was funny back in the 80s and 90s, you just couldn't do now, you know?
mate. I I think like because there's a lot of people that lament, oh, you can't do this, you can't say that. Like comedy, all of it's of its time. Like none of
Mm,
it ages particularly well.
that's
Like
true.
you can watch, whatever. Like and
Murphy,
if
Eddie Murphy doing Delirious, I mean, it's still good.
yeah,
But some of the jokes mightn't be people, "What's an ice cream van?" or things like that, but yeah, yeah.
but
But
yeah,
I know what you're saying, yeah.
it doesn't age well in the sense that like if when it's like it's so much of its time, and that's why one of the things I think now with all the clips and everything online,
Mm,
like I kind of hope that people will still go see it live because it doesn't matter. Like you can watch the greatest comedy special ever.
mm.
Like you could have seen if you could have sat down and watched those two Billy Connolly shows on your TV, you'd laugh out loud a few times. But
It's not
in
the
the
same.
room, when
Yeah.
you're with the people, there's an energy, there's a magic to the live performance of it
I shit you
that it
not, the second night, I couldn't stand up at the end. I was hurting from laughing, like, absolutely physically hurting. He had us just in like, when you say people have you in the palm of their hands, we were in the palm of his hand, and he
Mm.
just you were hanging off every word. I remember there was an empty seat front row, and he started his show, and he's like, a couple of people were straggling in, and he's like, oh, he's just ripping into them as you'd expect, fair enough. And then he just kept pointing to this seat, going, "I can't fucking wait! I can't fucking wait!" Right? And it was at the opera house, and the doors going into the room actually go away from the stage. And what Billy couldn't see is they opened the doors, and it was a guy in a wheelchair, right? And we could all see it, he couldn't, and we're laughing, and he's like, "You fucking beauty!" And then he comes around the corner, and he just looks at this bloke. He goes, "You fucked about 6 jokes, mate." He goes, "That has wrecked me." Which was the funniest thing he could have said, right? Like it's clever. We all know the jokes he probably would have said, but this is genius now. Like, yeah,
Right. And that happens. I had one recently where I was talking to the crowd about I get this working on this bit about billionaires, and I was talking to them about how, like, if there's anyone here, like I say to the audience, is there anyone here that if I gave you $1 billion wouldn't quit your job? Because my whole thing was like, why do they all still have jobs, these tech billionaires?
yeah. I
Like,
mean,
you're a billionaire, mate.
unless your job was doing coke and hookers, and then you would probably not quit. But yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, what do you do? And so I said, "Is there anyone?" And this one lady, it was at a charity gig too, just puts her hand up, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, what you
oh no, here we
workaholic,
go.
are you? What do you do?" Like, I was ready to rip into her about, come on. It was midweek too,
Yeah,
because so I've had it a few where I wouldn't quit my job. "Well, mate, a bit of a workaholic, are you?" "Yeah, yeah, mate. Workaholics are still at work. What
yeah,
You're here. Like, what are you doing?"
yeah, good call.
And this lady just goes to me. She goes, I'm a palliative care nurse."
Yeah,
And
well,
I
just so
was
you know, lady, those people would leave you in a heartbeat if they had $1 billion. So
a palliative care nurse. So I just said, "Well,"
yeah,
I said to
suck
her,
the life out of the room.
I said, that's what I said. I said, "You must be good at it because you've killed the vibe in here."
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
Mate,
Yeah.
it was one of those like, oh, it couldn't have been a worse occupation
No.
for her to have.
Yeah. But
Mm.
even go and buy a hospital and move on with your life.
Yeah,
Here's
exactly.
100,000,000. Go and build a hospital, build a wing. I don't
Oh,
care what you got to do. You're not hanging around doing this.
yeah, surely
Um,
not. So, mate, so it's funny you don't consider yourself a comedian. This
well,
is
this is
one
the
of
thing. Like when you asked me, and I think, I'm happy to say, I was like, mate, are you out of your mind? I am not your people. Like you're talking to legends and people that are coming through, and it's unbelievable. And then you put me on, you're a fool. But anyway, you must have run out of guests, and that's up to you.
no, no. But well, this is the thing, mate. This is I'm and because as a comedian, sometimes I can be very, and as an industry, sometimes we're very protective of who gets to call themselves a comedian, because there's nothing worse than seeing some TikToker who's done a bit of funny stuff, or got
Oh,
the
what
same
about
thing. And
TikToker pranksters? Aren't they fun?
yeah, and then and then they get billed as a comedian. When you see them on something, they're billed
A
as a comedian.
comedian.
You're just like, mate, you've never done it. But then I like now I look at it like, you've written over the years that you've been doing these podcasts. You've written more jokes than probably most of the comedians working. So,
Yeah, but just because you've done something a lot doesn't mean you've done it well, Andrew.
oh, mate, there was some good moments. I thoroughly enjoyed. I'll be honest, there was a time, with full credit to the boys, where that was in my listening pattern for the week, but I wouldn't listen to it until, because you used to release that on was that a Thursday,
Tuesday.
Tuesday,
Tuesday night, Wednesday
Tuesday
morning,
night.
yeah.
Yeah, so it'd
Yeah.
come out. It'd be in my list on a Wednesday morning, and I wouldn't
Parking it.
listen to it until after we'd done Matty Johns on a Sunday. So I'd listen on the Monday
Right.
after,
Yeah.
because I didn't want
Mate,
to.
I do the same thing. It's funny. I started this podcast doing the race car one, and just it's a very what I realize now is rugby league's a lot easier to make jokes about because there's more stories, there's more, and
Yeah.
there's not so many precious people. To be honest, like I've trod on some sacred cows already, and people have pushed back on me and said, you can't joke about this, you can't joke about that, and it's like that's the thing. It's a joke. Like
Mm.
if you can't cop it, then move on. Steve Hughes once said, "If you're offended, that's okay. You can be offended. You're not going to die. You can be
Yeah.
offended. So yeah, doing this, I've done some jokes, but then this guy came out and said I stole some jokes from him about motorsport, and I'm like,
Oh.
I'm thinking, brother, like I've written 30 podcasts a year for 10 years, 9 years. I don't need to steal your gear. And when I looked who it was, they hadn't done a podcast for 4 years. It's like, mate, give me a spell. Like I don't need to trawl through 4 years of old podcasts to try and find a joke. But exactly what you're saying is what we would do. Like we would steer clear of any sort of football comedy show to make sure we didn't. And if a joke was done to death, done a couple of times by different people, you just know that that's just the deal. Like there was an obvious joke, obviously, and everyone said it. It's like tweets. Like
Mm.
I've done tweets where someone said I stole it from you. Like, why would I steal a tweet from you and put myself on show? Do you know what I mean? Like, you've got 1,000 followers. So basically, you're saying I can't write a joke and I'm stealing it from you and taking the risk that no one's going to notice. Mate, we had the same joke. That's cool. But, it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. And so the same thing with like listening to podcasts. I would never ever listen to a footy podcast, especially you and the professor, because we were just like, we don't want to be ever accused of stealing gear.
Yeah, no, and that was the because I used to listen to yours on a Monday, so I knew that the stories had cleared, and it used to
Yeah,
fascinate me because especially because people would accuse art. I remember we had one time a podcast that maybe had I forget what it was a real specific podcast. It was a couple of blokes that did a podcast for one of the Sydney teams.
right.
They weren't affiliated; they were just fans of one particular
Sure.
team, and then just dropped in the DMs. Oh, you guys stealing this? I'm like, mate, we didn't know you
You
existed.
think that we just trawl through every rugby league podcast hoping to find a piece of gold? Like we just don't have the time, and nothing personal. But I'm not going to listen to a Raiders podcast or a Manly podcast, or you know what I mean. I don't listen to a
Yeah,
Tigers podcast. I'm not going to listen to someone else's team's podcast and steal a joke for the sake of stealing a joke. There's a term for it where someone writes the same joke at the same time. I remember Muddy Sheagull talking about it, and yeah, that just happens, right? It's a part of if anything happens right now in the world, there'll be someone writing a joke, but there'll also be someone probably thinking that joke as well.
oh yeah, and this is the thing. It's especially, and you see it on Twitter all the time. There's if you go through any given topic, you see the same joke come through hundreds
Yeah,
and hundreds of time because you just got a bunch of people all having
thinking
the
the same
same
way.
reaction.
Yeah,
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 there's
yeah.
there's a formula to all of it, and there's
It,
only
it,
so many twists you can put on it.
well, it's funny too. Like what I've noticed around Twitter is, and you being a comedian, you would appreciate this. Is the joke is as much about the importance of whether it works or not is much about the joke, but also the way you deliver it. Like sometimes if you write things in a certain way, the joke's not there. Whereas if you put it in a different, you feed the joke at the end, or you set it up with a bunch of shit at the start of the joke, then that's where the buy-in is. But then Twitter's a bit like podcasting. Sometimes you write shit where you're thinking, I'm not even going to send that. I'll push it out, and you come back and it's taken off. And then other times you think it's absolute gold, and it's crickets. It's a funny thing, and it's Twitter. I don't know about you, but Twitter's sort of. I used to love Twitter. Like I was addicted to
Mm.
it. I couldn't watch a rugby league game without having Twitter open, so I could just tweet my thoughts. Now I'll jump on like 2 or 3 times a week, mostly to check out groups that I'm in to chat to blokes, and then get out of there. It's become, and I'm not blaming you, um, Elon, but
Elon.
it's become a bit of a cesspit.
Yeah, yeah. I got to be honest. I'm trying to get excited about Threads, but even that, I'm
I
just like,
can't.
it feels like
So it feels
yeah,
like Aldi to Twitter. That's what it feels like.
yeah, it does. There's something a bit off with
Yeah.
it, and I
Maybe
don't
because
know.
it's so similar? I don't know. Like, it just seems so similar that
Yeah, yeah.
maybe that's what it is.
It's like we had this and we've moved away from it, and then you're like, oh, it turns out I didn't miss it.
Yeah,
I'm
I've
I'm
got a
with you.
Ferrari, but it used to be a Toyota MR2, but it's still a Ferrari, if you know what I'm if you squint. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not.
That's it's yeah. I'm a bit with you there. I'm a bit of an Instagram sort of reels guy at the moment. But
Problem is just losing your life watching the
oh,
fucking things.
it's terrible. To be honest, I go through stages where like I barely look at it. My big thing's always been I'll post, and I have it because I have to as a
Mm,
comedian. So I'll post stuff, and then I tend not to even look. Like one of the things I do with this podcast is I've had a few people ask me how the numbers are, and I'm like, I have no idea. I
yeah,
don't look
don't
because all
look,
that.
yeah.
Well, the only thing what the upside is, I go, wow, that's really good, and the
Mm,
downside is I look and go, oh, that's disappointing, and it just gives me a reason not to do this, which I
yeah.
know,
It
I know that,
it's
or
funny,
feel bad about something that I enjoy doing. So,
the podcast that I'm doing at the moment, numbers is a big thing, and they can tell you at any one time. They've got programs now that will tell you how many people are reading an article on their website right now,
that's
and how
crazy, isn't it?
yeah, and like I mean, real time they can look. They can look at how many
Mm.
people have read that article today. They can look at what the most popular hour was. They can look at all this sorts of things, and so numbers are a big thing for them. And like I know what Full Credit the Boys done in its prime, what we were pulling, and they were good numbers. Like it actually put us in like the top 5% of podcasts at one stage. But
Wow.
as the market becomes saturated, and we could see it coming, like we watched, Fox Sports putting out 5 or 6 podcasts a week, and News Limited putting out 6 podcasts, and Triple M doing 7 or 8 podcasts a week. And now you've just got this whole market saturation where I don't think that you'd have to be extraordinary as an everyday punter to get it up and get it going, and to be around those numbers. And I think that's more to I think it's a bit sad, to be honest, because podcasting maybe 6 years ago, and you say like we used to do the joke, everyone's got a podcast, but
Mm.
6 years ago there was some really good, clever new ideas, but it's pretty much now cookie cutter stuff from a lot of people, from a lot of people.
Yeah, I know. I think you're right. Like sort of lament those older days too, where you like it was more, yeah, just people doing different things, and you could
Pick the eye
drift
teeth
in
out
and
of it,
out.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like every now and
Whereas,
then you'd listen to a Rogan and then he'd start talking about gun laws, and so you'd jump off or about him killing an elk or
mm,
something, and you'd I don't need to listen to this for a while. But like there was some good stuff, and you just come in and out of stuff. But this day and age, like unless you're not a Rogan or what's the guy Bateman that's got his show with his mates that's just
the
going
smartless.
Smartless. Like, I mean, that's gone gangbusters, but look what they started from. They're well-known guys. It's not like
Yeah.
they're starting from their own garage and just pumping out to see how it goes.
No, you got
Um,
Teen Wolf 2 sitting there on the mic.
Not his
How do you
proudest moment,
compete?
let's be fair.
How do you compete with Teen Wolf 2?
Saying that he's doing a bit better than old mate that was in Team Wolf 1, so he's
Yeah. Where's his podcast?
oh, there's some jokes there. There'd be a lot of rattling in the
Oh,
background.
right.
Yeah, so like the whole thing's changed. And I'm not that I'm like me and Sid haven't said Full Credit to the Boys is dead. We just
Mm,
needed to rest. We got through 2020, which was tough. Like that was a tough part of doing podcasting. We found new ways to do things. It was don't forget for 3 or 4 months there was no football, and yet people
yeah.
said, "Can you please keep doing your podcast? Give us something." So we were doing podcast reviews of rounds from just we'd pick a random year and just do that round from that year. And mate, some of it was great. Like you could say, oh, this kid called Cameron Smith debuted this week. He won't go anywhere. He was fucking terrible. Probably won't play 30 games and things like that. So it was, but by the end of 2020, we were hurting. Like it sounds hurting's probably a bit rich, but it just said we were just stuffed. Yeah,
Creatively
yeah.
spent.
It's
And
funny too. I just listened to you talking to the professor, and it's funny. He basically said exactly how we felt.
mm,
You just get to a point where you're like, we've got no jokes, and we record in 24 hours.
yeah. Yeah, oh mate, there was a few days sitting in like especially on those Sundays when we were doing the Friday show and then we'd have the Sunday and we'd go and just
Yeah,
we'd meet
overkill.
and we'd just have nothing. And
Yeah.
I remember a few days him looking at me and just going, okay, it's 1 p.m. We've got zero jokes. It's 2
Yeah,
p.m.
man.
We got zero jokes. And we always made it to air. I mean, sometimes we were pushed back. We were supposed to be on in the first segment and we went on in the third because
Mm.
it
We're
wasn't all
still
quite
writing.
delivered.
The paint was still wet.
Mate, we're still like he's still sitting at the edit suite going, okay, I think it's ready. So, but
uh,
But yeah, like it is like I don't think, and especially because listening to your podcast, one of the things when you guys were talking about, not doing it this year, one of the things I could hear was like knowing how much preparation, like I had an appreciation for how much preparation you guys would have
well,
been
you came
putting
to the
into that.
studios and seen what we did. Like,
Mm.
it was a good little setup, and but it was hard work. It was work, and it
Yeah,
was work. That's the thing.
but which is fine when something's worked. But then, like, I don't know about you. How are you now? Are you enjoying watching the footy on the weekend?
No,
Just
I follow the
have you?
Tigers, you clown. Like,
Well,
no,
I
I've
can't
enjoyed
get
footy since 2000 and whatever. Like, yeah. Look, have I watched? I'm watching footy, but I've really drifted in and out. I know. Sid, I was talking to Sid on the weekend. He said I haven't watched a game. He
that's
said,
that. I was wondering about that because I had the similar reaction when I stopped having to
yeah.
do it for work. I sort of drift in and out a bit more. I don't feel guilty about not seeing
Well,
a
this
game
is
or
the
not.
thing, like, and what I hate now is like someone will message me and say, "Hey, what do you think about this bloke and this player and this?" And I'm thinking, I've got no idea what you're talking about, mate. I wouldn't like if you asked me to put him in a lineup, I wouldn't be able to pick out which bloke you're talking about.
Mm,
But you know what it's like. You become immersed in it at some stages where that's all you. And to be honest with you, we still had full time jobs and we were, working hard, like working long hours. And so any moment you could think of something, you'd write it down or you'd say it into your phone or whatever. And, I've got these random messages to myself that to this day, I sort of know what the hell I was talking about. Like Band Aid, sand, Cameron Smith is like, what the hell was that about? But yeah, it sort of the love of rugby league. It is coming back, but it's not at the level it was probably in 14, 15, 16.
that's it's funny because I've had many people like talk to me when they've watched the show and they always but it always looked like you guys were having so much fun.
Which you were.
Must have been yes.
Yeah.
They're like,
Oh,
"Must have been the dream job." I'm like, "Yeah, but everything, like, can be a job."
yes.
Like, even if it's your favorite
Yeah.
thing, and then when you
Even
are
palliative care nurses, that can be a
yeah,
job.
even
Yeah.
I mean, it's we all go into it for our passion of
Yeah,
watching
of
people die,
course.
but
Yes. I mean, usually on stage with me, but
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but yeah, I know what you're saying. Like for us, the recording was the fun bit. It was the
Yeah.
writing that's the blue. Although there was one night where after COVID, we figured out a way where he could be at his place, I could be at my place, and we could record that way. So I wasn't driving, at midnight to get home. And so we're doing that in one day, and we did the first part of the show, which is usually about a 30-minute bit. And I looked over and I hadn't pushed record.
Oh,
And
no.
I could see Sid's face, and I was thinking, he's over this. He's over this. I reckon that was probably the first thing that sort of was like, yeah, I can't do this for much longer. This is bullshit. And then we had to do 35 minutes that we just done and do the same jokes because I couldn't be bothered writing jokes again and listen to him laugh and going, oh, that's your fake laugh. Oh, cool. And now I know.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Now I know the difference.
Yeah. You fraud. I've heard. Now I realise that's 5 years of fake laughs, you prick.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it was, that was I think there was a lot of things that happened around that time where we're just like, "Ooh, this is starting to become hard work?" Um, so yeah, a couple of times we are gonna go and do a live show, and one of us had come down with COVID a week before, things like that.
Yeah.
It's just like, "Oh god."
Mate,
Even that
that
was this life was sucked out of it. We did some great live shows, but like we did with the Johns Brothers, which was fantastic. We did a famous one with Craig Gower and Jamie Soward that will go down in infamy. And thank God, because we used to take everyone's phones off them before they come into the room.
yeah,
And
you were
thank
early
God,
adopters of that.
yeah, thank God we did that day, because there would be lawsuits aplenty, because those two, particularly Gowie, let out some stories where we were like, even there was people in the front row going, "No more, no more," like, pull him up. Yeah.
Wow. When you're upsetting the full credit to the boys audience, that is,
They're a loose group. Yeah,
you know
they're
what?
a
That is
very loose
that's
group.
actual grab a mirror time.
Yeah, yeah. We used
Now
to have this
that
guy that used to so he used to just weekly send us a cock shot. It's like,
really?
"Why are you doing this?" He said, "'Cause you keep mentioning me about sending a cock shot." So, and it was
I
him, it was the same cock every time. It's like, bro,
that's I mean, I didn't say stop. I just
no,
wanted to know
no,
why.
no, it's beautiful, don't get me wrong. Put some blood in it, make it presentable if you can, but
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Yeah, that was, so I do have to ask you about that. Grab a mirror
Mm.
was where did that come from? Because
Well,
that was probably my favorite podcast segment
it
or
was also
even
the thing
radio
that killed
segment.
the show finally, because
Yeah.
it was hard going, like reading through people's through people's tweets, figuring out what they were doing, but also writing our own. There was many
Mm.
times where we'd come to the studio and I'd say, "Have you got to grab a mirror?" And Sid would be like, "No." I'm like, "Oh, nor have I, nor have I." And then one night we made ourselves sit there and write a grab a mirror each before we started recording, and then we started recording, and he had the same grab a mirror as me. It was like, oh, god damn it. So we even just made a joke of that. Tell us who wrote these jokes better. But so what it was, and I think, as like I said, I used to listen to, or still do listen to a lot of radio. I think someone on Triple M the other day said there's really only 10 different segments in FM radio. It's just that they're worded differently. So
Yeah.
Grab a Mirror is no different to, I don't know, I Call BS is on Triple M, which happened out not long after us. It's not a really an original idea, but the Grab a
What gets
Mirror
you
part of it,
ghoulies on
yeah, what
WS?
gets you ghoulies? Yeah, so I think Joel and Fletch do something similar. So
Mm.
it's not a new idea, but it grew and grew and grew, where it became like we actually had to make a rule. We have to only do 10, because we were
Yeah.
getting 30 or 40 people tweeting in. And then we found, people started writing to us in messages. Can you put this in as grab a mirror? I couldn't put it in a tweet. And it's just, oh, mate. And then I'd say to Sid, I'll put them in order. And it sounds like an easy job. It became the biggest pain in the ass between that and writing it and everything else. But funnily enough, and what we realized at the very start of the show is, and we always sort of tried to do this. And if you're a young fella in a podcast right now, think about this. Everyone who tweeted me, everyone who wrote me a message, everyone who wrote a grab a mirror, we always tried to reply and give them some sort of
Yeah.
interaction. Even if it was a shit, you guys suck, whatever. We're like, cool, bro, no dramas. Good for us. But yeah, we always try to be very, very responsive to people reaching out to us, and it worked. And Grab a Mirror was one way of that. So people had that sort of, oh, that's me on our show, which I think is important. People actually love to hear you saying their words. The it's just what it is. And between that and we used to have people ring in. We actually had a burner phone for a couple of years where people would ring and leave their grabber mirrors, but there was some horrendous stuff on that we just could not get out there. Yeah, Scott Morrison, if you're listening, we saved you.
That's yeah, I got to say grab a mirror, I loved that segment, and there was a few times I almost sent you a grab a mirror and then just went, "Oh, actually I can just use that as stand up. I've got an outlet."
Yeah, don't burn your good gear. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just like,
It's so true. But then when you have to write one every week, it's like, oh Jesus God. It's another, like, we would section the show. The first part of the show was three, what we used to call dick stories. So we'd write jokes about whatever happened, some crazy shit, like you said, in Florida or whatever. So there was a bunch of jokes we had to write, and then we do the footy and the news and everything else. Then we do grab a mirrors, and we have to write our own. It's basically a monologue, like,
mm.
like David Letterman would deliver, just not at his level or standards. But every week, yeah, it was. And what I realize now, mate, is when you see people like Martin Malloy and things like that, you go, God, you must work hard. You must work hard.
Well, you got to also remember too that there are, like, you guys.
Writers.
Yeah, there's writers. There's people
Mm.
that work on this sort of stuff. I'm not saying that Martin Malloy had writers or
No,
whatever,
I don't
but
think they
like
did. Yeah.
there are people that
We
do.
actually entertained getting a producer in and doing all the shit groundwork, because
Mm.
we're actually going to pay them to do it. Like, we weren't making great money out of it. We made okay money, but we actually just thought, why don't we get someone to lighten the load? And
Yeah.
we tried to bring a third wheel in. We had brought a guy in from Triple M for a little while. He lasted about 9 months, and it sort of just didn't work. He had different things going on in his life, which is cool. So he left, and so it became just me and Sid. So yeah, I think with a producer would be fantastic. We also chatted to a radio station they wanted us on, but then their bigwig came up and listened to our podcast, which we tried to say to them, that's not what we're going to put on air. But
No.
I don't think they thought we were worth the risk. Well, I know that because they told us.
That's the disappointing thing too of like, okay, this is what you're doing on a podcast, but that doesn't
Yeah.
mean like my view there would have been, okay, these guys are smart enough to write this many jokes and format their show and build
Yeah.
this out of nothing. Surely they're smart enough to adapt it to
We're
radio.
not we're not going to drop the magic on the radio on us. It was actually a Sunday morning shift, Barney. So there would have been like 8 people listening anyway. 7 of those would have been on their way to church, admittedly, but that would have been
Yeah.
regrettable. But probably the Jesus jokes wouldn't cut
They
it. But
they could have prayed to save you, mate.
yeah.
You would have given them something to pray about. They would have
Well,
loved it.
do it now anyway while you're there.
Yeah.
No. So yeah, look, we got close. We actually had people in the middle dealing with us and everything else, but it just never happened. And then we looked at you guys and we're like, look at them guys living the dream. So it was good to hear you and you and Professor just have a deep and meaningful and say how much it was hard work. It's like, oh yeah, good, sucked in.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was hard work, and yeah, like it's like anything. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's funny. I remember at one stage he actually said to us when everything's going real well and everyone's like telling us how well they're going. He goes, oh, "We should enjoy this because this might be the only chance we get." And I was like, "Oh, I don't want to think of it like that." But you got to.
Yeah. It's a good call. It's probably the way you should live your life. It's hard. Did you ever do anything where you put it to air and then went to bed and then went, "Oh, what have we done?"
No, I'm just trying to think. There was a few where we had phone calls, and there was like it had to be cut. Things had to be cut out of replays. And
Interesting.
there was, oh, you need to apologize, or there's one particular one that I probably can't say on there was a guy there was a joke we'd made that it
Right.
inadvertently involved someone that you don't want to make jokes about. And so I'll tell you off air the whole story, but it was
Scott Morrison.
that wasn't a good one. Yeah, Scott, bloody ScoMo. No, we suggested he wasn't the number one ticket holder.
Turns out he wasn't. I know someone that went to school with him. He was a Roosters tragic, but more rugby union than anything.
Yeah, he's a Bronte boy.
Yeah.
My favorite memory, one of my favorite memories of being at Fox is we were at Fox when he became Prime Minister, the day he became Prime Minister. And I remember we were doing some prep and we thought, well, we'll see if we can get anything for this, like for the show, because we knew he was a Sharks fanatic or whatever. See if there's anything around, we're going to address it. And so I just went on Twitter and was looking at him, and I found the infamous, just came up organically, this infamous tweet. I heard he shit his pants at and so I heard he shit his pants at Engadine Macca's after the Sharks lost the 97 grand final.
Yeah.
And then the first response was just a guy who said, "Yeah, how bad, but." And then the guy,
how do you measure that?
The guy replies, "Pretty bad, I heard. My mate was working there at the time." And then the original replier just replied, "Oh, what a hectic cunt." It was one of the greatest bits of discourse of Australian political.
Wow.
I just wanted to screenshot that and hashtag Ozpol.
Yeah, we're the only one that can talk like that about our Prime Minister. I mean, if you haven't shit yourself on the drink, you haven't really had a drink, in my opinion. I shit myself one night at there used to be this nightclub in Newcastle called the Castle, and it was 3 stories.
I know the Castle, yes.
Yeah.
And across the road from Macca's.
Correct. And now it's called something else. I can't remember what it's called.
What is it called? Is that JD's now?
Oh, I
Or is
really
that something
don't
else, or is
know.
that what is that what Fanny's is called? They're all different names, mate,
Yeah.
than the glory
So,
days.
well, yeah, and so I was up there one night, and it was when white stonewashed jeans were in vogue, right? And so I'm up there.
Whoa,
I'm
2023. Wow.
yeah, exactly. Last weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm up there and I'm doing my best, and I'm going okay. And anyway, I thought, oh, geez, I'm in some trouble here. And I thought, I'll just push that out. It'll be fine. And as I pushed it out, I was like, nope, nope. So I ran. But you know that run where only your knees moved from your knees down, the rest of your body is pretty much still. So I'm running across the nightclub, jumps into the shitters, and I look, and through the miracle of all miracles, it's gone everywhere, but nothing on the white jean. It's all in this pair
Oh.
of boxes, right? And so I'm like, oh, I'll be fine. So I cleaned myself up. I dropped the Reggies, pulled them up, threw them away. Anyway, I came back out I cleaned myself up, mate. It took me about 3 hours to clean my hands, but so I didn't. And so I cleaned up and I walked outside. My mate goes, I'm just going to go to the Dunnies. I said, yeah, good as gold, mate, good as gold. And he comes back and he goes, some fucking animal shit himself in there and left his undies on the top of the system. I said, you're joking.
Newcastle. What kind of town is this?
Let's get out of here.
There are animals up here. Oh,
Yeah, it's a true story.
wow.
That night also we were staying at we were on a footy trip, and we were staying at some place
This
just
doesn't sound
across.
like a footy trip sort of a night,
Nah, it doesn't.
mate.
Doesn't. It's I don't know how they get themselves in so much trouble on Mad Monday. It's crazy. We were staying there, and my mate said, I'm going back to the motel. And we said, oh, okay, no worries. So he said, I went downstairs, I called a cab, and he said, oh, let's just say it's, some motor, it's Newcastle motor. And he said, oh, I cabbed a Newcastle motor in. The cabbie looked at him, he said, you sure? He goes, yeah. He goes, all right. So he said, get in. You get in. He did a U. He goes, there you go. He charged him $6.
That's fantastic.
He
This
said,
guy,
cost me $6 to cross the road.
mate, this guy is really scared of crossing roads on his own. So he didn't have anyone to hold hands with. Better take a cab.
Didn't even have time to vomit in his cab. He said, I was filthy.
Like
Yeah.
the castle, there used to be just up from the castle towards like the beach end. There was a place called the Jolly Roger, which was a
Yes.
dodgy joint. And on
Yes.
Wednesday nights, which was student night, they used to have amateur strippers.
Yes.
So they'd have a competition. You could get up and you get a free drink if you stripped, and then the winner would get, I don't know, $50 or some.
Fantastic. Let's bring that back.
So yeah, some grand sum, and every like there
Now,
was that many
now it's
weeks.
called the Bachelorette, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, there was that many weeks when we go out on student night when I was like 18, 19, and there'd be at least one or two blokes like, let's go, the amateur strippers, let's go have a look, let's go have a look.
100%.
And all you do is just watch like 6 blokes in a row take their kit off, and not one chick get anywhere near the stage because it's a room full of blokes wanting to see a chick get nude. They're not doing it.
This is not cool.
Yeah.
I went to the Star Hotel before it shut, and
Oh, wow.
I was underage. Yeah. Yeah. I've seen some stuff in that place, man, that put hair on my nuts. Put it that way. That was a loose unit joint.
Yeah.
Some great stories about that. Obviously, that place.
Mate,
There was
the
some
Star
strippers
Hotel.
there. That's the first time I saw a stripper.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
God.
And yeah, she wasn't a 10. Got to be honest. We did a story. It was in the last season of Full Credit the Boys. There was a story about a guy who married a pair of Siamese twins, and
Oh, yeah.
so we did this bit about it, right? And look, I've got to be honest. We did a lot of jokes that look. We skirted the line, all right. But we always were of the thing: don't punch down, only punch up. So don't just smash people for the sake of it. But there were jokes in there that they were saying, like, one girl was saying about the other girl who was a Siamese sister. Let's not forget that. Oh, we've got the same taste in fashion. And I said, well, thank fuck for that. And Sid said, yeah, we love T-shirts with 2 head holes.
Oh. Oh
And
my
we
God.
honestly, it was because you think about it, it's just a fertile. The more they spoke, the more we could get out of it. And so this is whole interview with him, and it was great. And mate, good luck to them. I don't care, whatever. But
Mm.
we just found this just fertile ground. But within 24 hours, someone wrote to one of our sponsors and they dumped us.
Oh, so is that the controversy?
Yes, yes. And I
Ah.
think we put that story back in our last show because we're like, fuck it. Yeah. There was
Yeah,
2
dump us
stories we
now.
couldn't run, and that was one of them, and there was another one. We actually we used to get, Sid's missus down to come down, and if we were wherever we thought, "Oh, this is a bit dusty," and
Yeah.
we did that one, and she goes, "No." But I think over time, she actually becomes so desensitized to what we were doing that she was letting run through as well. We're like, so when we get backlash, it's like, "It's your fault. You're letting it through. You're the one saying it's fine."
When the voice of reason becomes unreasonable.
Yeah, that's right. We've corrupted the uncorruptible.
Oh, mate, mate. We are getting about to time because I do need to tell you that story off air. But before
Mm,
we go, um, obviously you build a podcast, you build Full Credit to the Boys up, great podcast, and I was buoyed to hear that you said it's not officially dead. You just
mm.
needed to be away from it for a bit.
It
So,
might need a cuddle if we come back. It might be a shortened version or something. Because the one thing I love about what I'm doing now is half hour,
mm,
so it's one and done. And I reckon like it's easier to do a one and done twice a week than it's to do a 2 hour. You know,
yeah, yeah, which is the way a lot of them are going too. A lot of podcasts are
Well, it's
going now. So,
double downloads, right? I was only thinking about this the
yeah,
other day. The way the media, in particular, are manipulating podcast numbers, it's quite fascinating to watch once you've done it yourself. You can see what they're
yeah.
doing. Oh, here's this, but then here's a 10-minute bit from the show that if you just want to listen to that while you're not doing that. You're only doing that because you know that that's going to be double your downloads. You're going to take it to your advertisers and say, look at these numbers. They're amazing, you know? So yeah, it's probably it's not dead, but it's just parked. It's just parked.
Mm.
Who knows? It might come back in some version. It might come back with 3 of us or 4 of us, or a rotating roster. We don't know, but it was just time to have a spell.
It would like, and it's just purely from a selfish point of view. It would be nice to hear you boys talking footy again, just because you did have a good way of getting at the cutting through the bullshit too around the game,
Yeah,
which I think at the moment we're at a
this
risk,
and
especially with sport, of the, I don't want to say the nerds taking over, but like the people that take it very, very seriously and don't like
yeah, they're usually
I
super coach players. That's what you find.
yeah.
Oh, what else is boring? I mean, fair dinkum. Is there anything worse than a super coach player? Oh, I got 12 points and I made him captain. Shut up, you
Well,
fool.
mate, I had a joke last year in one of my shows about the Dolphins just being a shit rugby league, and when I put it online, like it got a lot of views and a lot of people like it, but I've never had more abuse for putting a joke up about, mate, you built your career on this game, how dare, like, it's like,
Oh,
mate, my whole thing when I was working on rugby league was I was making fun of it. I never claimed to be.
correct. Correct. And you know what? If you want serious, there's plenty of places to find serious. Go and
Oh
listen
yeah.
to it. Go and read it. Don't follow me. Don't listen to my gear. Don't come to my shows. Like it's what we do. And if you don't
Mm.
like it, that's cool. It's a big world. There's
It's a big
there's
internet.
enough.
Feel free to look at something else.
Massive, massive, mate. Go back to looking at your porn. That's fine. But yeah, look, it's sometimes we wonder whether we just jumped out because we probably would have been cancelled anyway. I remember Jimmy Carr saying that if he gets cancelled, it's probably for a joke he's already done. So there's nothing he can do about it.
Mm.
You know, so that may be true as well. It's a funny time, and like you said earlier in the show, it's sure everyone says it's hard to do jokes, but I still think it is. And that's why I think Full Credit to the Boys worked, is because it was a throwback to maybe 10 years ago. You know, we don't do racist gear. We do Siamese twin gear, but that's good stuff. But we don't do anything that was absolutely treading on people's toes or punching down as best we could.
And intention, like I still believe intention matters, and you guys have never, like, it was good-hearted joking.
Yeah, 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 yeah. He
Do you know
couldn't
what I
get
mean?
it. Yeah, and footy. as compared to motorsport, like I come back to it from the very start of this show, footy, you can throw a heap of punches and no one gives a shit.
Well, that's one of the things I've always loved about rugby league, and I've
You can't do it in AFL. I know that. I
no,
watch. I watch.
it's that's what when we so that last year when we were when COVID hit, we were supposed to be doing an AFL version of our show
Wow.
as well,
You're
and
from down that way, right?
yeah, I grew up on the Victorian border, so I grew up around a lot of
It's
AFL.
time you
My
fucked
old
off.
man,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, no, my old man was like my parents both grew up in Sydney, so my old man played league and union growing up, so
Right, right.
he was, but we only got like that's where it was funny with me being like the having to get right around rugby league. When we went into the history of stuff, I had this big missing thing because we got when I was living down there, we got 4 games live a year, and that was the 3 state of origins and the grand final.
Yep.
So when I actually got home from a shift at Safeway on the day of the '97 grand final to watch the second half, and the Knights were in it, and we were moving to Newcastle that next year. So my parents were actually in Newcastle looking at houses that weekend, which in hindsight wasn't a great weekend to be looking for real estate in Newcastle. Not
I
anyone
think
was
I danced
interested.
with your mum at the castle one night. I was wearing white jeans.
Yeah. She said that. This bloke just
Yeah,
run off.
yeah, and stunk.
And dad went in to use the toilets and said, "You wouldn't believe."
How unlucky is that? Oh,
But mate, before we go though, once again, so full credit to the Noises, the podcast. Full credit
yep.
to the boys. Isn't dead those
And you can
Instagram
listen to the back
handles.
catalogue. I think there's 300 episodes there. Like
Yeah.
some of it would have aged for sure, but some of it, the most of the jokes wouldn't have.
Well, especially there's a lot of great interviews you did with like former players
Yeah,
and rugby league identities. So, and then there's also yeah, the jokes hold up. Like not all of it's you had to know what was going on that round.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's
Well, we never did half the time, so how would it? How
no, it was a
would
good
they?
mix,
I
mate.
said, the best thing that ever happened to us was KO minis. Oh, thank God.
Oh, you and me both, mate.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't worry about that.
So you were saying just quickly about the AFL, your plans to go to AFL Town. What
Oh
happened?
yeah, and when we were down there, so beautiful bit of Fox. So we were down there to shoot they do the promos each year
Of
for the
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
the bumpers where
Yeah.
you got the drone coming through, and there's all the talent there, and the best team in footy coverage, all that sort of stuff. And so we were in both the rugby league and the AFL ones, and then the AFL one, I don't think the next season, I don't think they retaped it. So for ages, for like a year and a half, there was just bumpers of the whole Fox footy coverage team with me and the professor just standing there in our gold jackets for no reason.
So yeah,
But they were all fascinated. They were like, "Oh, mate, oh, geez, you get away with some stuff up there." I'm like, "Oh,
do you reckon?
we'll have
That's
some
the thing.
swings
Like
down here too."
we got told that AFL really controls the journos down there. Like
Yeah,
the Buzz Rothfields of the world wouldn't go fly down there. Maybe Buzz would because he's been around for a long time, but like these new fly by nighters that love to sort of hone in on the gossip side of things and look at negativity. They'd have their hard passes removed. That's what we got told from someone in the AFL. We just
well,
pull them.
it's the one thing I've always admired about the league is the league just
They know.
warts and all.
Controversy sells, just like anything sells. Like there's not a bad news story that rugby league can't get through. There's
Yeah,
not.
and
We've had 2
they've
cases of dogs being assaulted.
well, they've given up trying to cover it up too. They're just like,
Well, you
okay,
can't.
this is what's happened. Whereas
Social media is killing them. Like you just can't. I remember Mark Geyer saying, we said to him, like, where would you be if social media was around when you were playing? He said Long Bay.
bloody hell.
Yeah.
I mean, he lives in Penrith now, so
Oh, he's a good man too. He's a great man. He's a true gentleman too.
yeah.
I've had a big session with him. It was his mates are more wild than him. He's the tame one. He's a good fella.
Yeah, one of the good-hearted guys. But that's what I sort of liked about rugby league is it sort of, wears its heart on its sleeve to a degree where, oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we all come together when we hear other sports shit cannon. It's like, hey, hang on, that's our job.
Yeah.
Where do you blokes get off?
That's it.
And the things that have been smothered down there in AFL land, they're not much better. They're not much
No,
better, mate.
mate, it's all of it's
It's controlled. It's just better controlled. That's all.
but it's the same. Like athletes are athletes. You got a bunch of young guys
100%.
in their 20s who,
Testosterone,
yeah,
flying, more money than God. What's going to happen? Oh, I don't know. They might
yeah.
go and shit themselves at the castle in white jeans. It just
Fingers crossed.
don't cross your fingers, mate. They're dirty.
Mate,
Yeah.
before we go, I want you to, because you've obviously two very successful podcasts in a time where it's not easy. What if anyone's out there thinking of starting a podcast?
Mm.
Um, what are your just couple of bits of advice for anyone
Yeah. Okay.
looking to do it?
Segmentize it. Make it consistent. So every week, the format is pretty similar every week. Listen to a lot of radio, and you'll get heaps of hints. Make sure your audio quality is top notch. The more you can spend on that, the more you'll get back. Because the one thing that no matter how great your content is, if you do it on dodgy gear and it sounds like shit, people won't listen. It doesn't matter how great you are. If Joe Rogan's doing it on tin pot speakers through his phone, no one's going to listen. That would be that. Just look, just like you said before, don't get stuck on numbers. Don't get stuck on numbers. Things will take up if they're good. I honestly believe that. And they, if the other, I guess probably too, the other thing I'd say, and something that I'm not great at, is play the social media well, especially Insta and to an extent TikTok, things like that. I think I wouldn't say concentrate too much on Twitter these days. I don't think you're going to get much buyback from getting a lot of content there, like a lot of followers there.
Unless it's like a white power sort of a podcast you're launching, then
I mean, yeah, I mean,
you might get some
that's
buzz on Twitter.
full credit to Hanson is coming out soon, where Pauline's going to come on every now and then, and we're going to have a chat about fish and chip shops and shit. So yeah, it should be
Yeah,
good. Yeah, look, and I think they're the ones. Is just keep it consistent, keep it as best you can quality wise, and don't be afraid to say shit to make people laugh if you're going to do a comedy one, especially. And don't
mate.
emulate anyone. Do your own gear. Do everything as best you can yourself. Come up with something different, because that might be the other thing they'll say that'll make you good, is something completely out of the box.
Mate,
We
that is
don't.
fantastic advice. Mate, thanks so much for doing this. Really
I'd do it
appreciate
any
it.
day, Barney. Both Sid and I love you. Sid does say hello, mate. We loved you guys. The night you came to the studio, I think we finished at 2:00 in the morning, which was great because both of us started work at 5:30. But mate, we've always been fans, and we probably should have done a podcast together. You never know. You
Mate,
might be the third wheel. Who knows?